Well, as you heard in our last conversation, the conflict over the Caravan pushing north from Mexico to the United States is really about economic supply and demand. And yet over on CNN, this is being framed as a narrative of racial conflict. Last night, Aaron Burnett said this.
Is there any way to interpret our country as being stolen when you are referring to immigrants coming from the South as anything other than racist?
Well, I think we both have to agree there's a distinction between a legal immigrant and an illegal immigrant. Now, legal immigration is something that we foster.
Our country is being stolen, talking about people whose skin is brown.
Joe Concha writes about media for The Hill, and he watches CNN for a living. He joins us tonight. Joe, watching Aaron Burnett, who I think of as sort of reasonable, actually, not one of the crazier people on CNN, read that question off a card. I don't know the answer, but it suggests these are being written for her to fit a storyline that they are pushing that is very far from reality.
I was surprised to hear Aaron Burnett say that, Tucker. I used to go on her show quite often. I have a pretty high opinion of her as being one of the better journalists over there. And to look at this through a racial prism, right? I mean, you worked there before. But the fact that the argument isn't being presented that this could possibly be, and I know this is really far out there, maybe a homeland security issue or one pertaining to rule of law in this situation. And it seems like we always seem to go to the president's motives too much, or we try to guess them, and it usually skews towards something sinister like race. And what can you say? There's another side to this story as well that's rarely presented in terms of the bias of omission that we don't hear about very often, and that is, and I think maybe you've brought it up once or twice, but it certainly isn't a traditional media narrative, and that is, what if I'm an American citizen and I want to go into another country illegally, like Mexico? And the reason why I'd bring up that narrative if I work in journalism is because oftentimes President Trump's immigration policy is deemed as cruel, is deemed as not opening our arms to the rest of the world. But what does the rest of the world do if I want to go there illegally? So I looked at Mexico as an example. It's a felony if you enter their country illegally and are caught. You get 2 years in prison up to. Immigrants who are deported and then come back, in other words, if I go in, I get deported and I go back in, that means 10 years in prison to me, maximum. And if I violate my visa, that could be a 6-year prison term. That sounds pretty tough, and we don't hear that narrative enough when explaining the context of world immigration as an example. We just focus on Trump and deem it to be cruel.
Yeah, I mean, not everything is about Trump. I mean, whatever you think of Trump, I mean, this is a question of borders, of sovereignty, once again, of economics. But it wasn't just Aaron Burnett. I didn't mean to single her out. Chris Cillizza, formerly at the Washington Post, went off about the idea of the approaching caravan of migrants being scary. Watch this.
I think he's presenting this group of people in sort of a Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome way. They're riding these Jeeps and they're coming to pillage. Yeah. They've got maces and they're coming to get us. That mental image works.
I mean, again, that's another person I sort of like over at CNN. But let's be honest, the people commenting on this live in neighborhoods whose demographic mix hasn't changed from 1960. They don't bear any of the burden of the mass demographic changes that have taken place. And so to deride anyone who's concerned about it as a nutcase seems a little much.
Yeah, and Chris was with the Washington Post. Now he's solely at CNN as their editor-at-large, and he's there to give colorful opinions. I'm not really going to knock him too much because that's what he's paid to do, to be provocative, and we're talking about him, so yay. But I saw another example recently, and it was Jim Sciutto.
Let me stop you right there, because I actually have tape of that, and let me say that Sciutto.
Wow, you got a lot of tape.
Well, I mean, there's something about this that gets me, because look, I've spent a lot of years of my life going on shows and sort of giving my opinion. You can dismiss him if you want. But if you're a network reporter who is, in fact, also a former Obama political appointee who's got a transparent agenda, it's dishonest. So here's Jim Sciutto as one example. Watch this.
When you read these tweets and the language that the president uses about immigrants, demonizing immigrants, I mean, I would say dog whistle, but there's really no dog whistle here because it's like a bullhorn.
Shouldn't it be in the Chiron former Obama political appointee when he talks like that?
Yeah, I don't know what the statute of limitations are on those things. For instance, Fox News has Karl Rove. But again, Karl is.
Yeah, but he's not covering the White House.
Right. No, I get it. I have a point, believe me. Karl Rove is here to give political opinions, right? Jim Sciutto there was sitting in an anchor chair. And it's not like Jim was like a Perino or a Fleischer who were press secretaries, right? Or even Carney, Gibbs, Ernest. They've all gone on to network jobs. But he actually was the chief of staff to the ambassador to China. So that's a pretty big deal. And now for him to be anchoring, I don't mind hiring him, but I don't think he could be there giving, obviously, opinions on things while in an anchor chair as a former Obama administration person, because people at home don't know probably that he was in the Obama administration because, he isn't introduced that way. There is no Chiron, and therefore people will think, oh, it's a good-looking anchor who's telling me that the president is not using a dog whistle but a bullhorn when it comes to racial overtones around immigration. And that's why people get confused and don't know fake news from real news and opinion from news, and the whole line's been obliterated. And everybody's just left scratching their head saying, where do I find the truth?
That's exactly it. I'm not afraid of other people's opinions. Obviously, we have them on constantly. I don't like deception, and that's what they're doing. Joe, thank you.
Pleasure as always. Thank you.